heard all of it. You may need to refresh me with a particular issue.
Just to go specifically, and Senator Reynolds put some related questions to you right at the outset, circumvention of data retention. I think you went straight to, I don't know if this was quite your wording, but illegitimate circumvention. So I guess you would mean anonymising software or using virtual private networks and so on. Are you aware of the wide variety of ways in which people could accidentally circumvent data retention by, for example, using a university network or logging onto the Parliament House Wi-Fi? I'm presuming you would agree that those systems would be out of scope of data retention.
We're aware that there are a number of ways in which people can conduct their communications and that they have a number of channels through which to do so.
Can I try and keep you to specifics rather than wandering off?
Sorry, I may have misunderstood the question. I'm not sure
Yeah.
this particular aspect of circumvention.
So
that
if somebody logs onto the public Wi-Fi in this building in Parliament House, would their data be retained by anybody in particular, or would that be out of scope of the national data retention regime?
So there are two specific exemptions in the bill that may be relevant, and I apologise if I don't comment on exactly how APH Wi-Fi works because I'm not familiar with a particular system.
It's not a commercial service provider, I guess. It's like a public, like if a council was offering it or a library or something.
So it's free and available to the public?
That's right. Yeah, there's no login or anything like that.
So there are a couple of exemptions that apply in the bill, and this is again an issue on which we've given evidence to the PJCIS, which are intended to ensure that the data retention obligation is appropriately targeted and achieves that proportional balance between assisting law enforcement security agencies and both privacy impact and the burden on industry. There are two concepts which we've employed that are modelled on concepts in the communications portfolio and the communications framework, and so there are particular exemptions for services that are provided in a same place and ones that are provided to an immediate circle. So the immediate circle ones, they wouldn't be applicable here. Immediate circle ones apply to entities such as universities, which you mentioned in your question, or corporate networks. So, for example, where a company provides services to its employees, but it might be across multiple sites. It's not broadly available to the public. So there's an exemption for immediate circle. There's also an exemption for, I think it's called same area or same place, which ensures that there is not an obligation placed in respect of services provided at a particular and specific location, and what the effect of that, if I can translate that into common services, would be that the Wi-Fi that you might access through a chain coffee store or takeaway store or something like that, which is commonly provided, a data retention obligation would not fall on the person that is offering that service. That is not to say that there may not be data collected, because naturally there are telecommunications service providers who are providing data, but the individual coffee shop provider does not need to disaggregate the data in respect of his or her individual customers, but there is still data available in the relation to the use of that telecommunications service, because ultimately the coffee shop owner is a customer of a telecommunications provider.
Yeah. So what about Parliament House then, or a public library?
So the data retention obligations would apply to a service provider, so the carrier or carriage service provider who is providing a service to a particular customer, and in respect of a public library, venue, etc., then the data retention obligations apply to the carrier or carriage service provider who is providing the end customer service to that library. The library itself doesn't need to break it down.
Who has to keep track of who's logged on to the free public Wi-Fi at a public library? Anybody or nobody?
Under the data retention obligation?
Yeah. Sorry, yeah, under the scope of your bill.
In relation to the individual uses of it, the library does not have to keep individual logons.
But therefore neither would the service provider that they're buying their services from.
The service provider needs to keep the elements of the data set in respect of their provision of the service, so the information about their subscriber, being the library, and the period over which that is used, and the information about the individual communications that are carried.
All right, what that tells to me is that if you want to avoid the national data retention regime that you're seeking to impose, you use the internet at a library, or come to Parliament House, or go to a free council hotspot, or use public transport.
I don't know that it necessarily tells you that, but it certainly does tell you that aggregation happens at a higher level. And again, as I said, I think in my introductory comments, I'd be reluctant to comment on the particular techniques that law enforcement and security agencies can use to support their investigations. I believe that they may have provided you with some advice to that effect in camera hearings.
But no, we're not subject to those.
Sorry?
We're not subject to those.
Or a briefing, perhaps.
Oh, last year?
Yes.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, I believe there were some briefings last year in which some of the agencies provided some guidance about what they may be able to do in those circumstances. But it is the case that notwithstanding that particular persons may use a range of strategies to seek to disguise their communications. And I should clarify, I don't know that I referred to it as illicit circumvention.
No, the word you
in any
used
way.
was I believe it might have been abusive, but you weren't responding precisely to this question, so that's not a problem. I think you went more to how people would illegitimately try and disguise their traffic for mendacious purposes, but I'm actually interested in a whole separate category of people using services innocently or otherwise that would be completely out of scope and not caught by a national data retention regime.
And it's that they would be caught. It's just a question by whom they would be caught. So the obligation does not apply. The obligation applies to carriers and carriage service providers. It does not apply to, for example, it does not impose a new obligation on all persons who provide access to their free Wi-Fi to their customers to now log their individual customers and to then be accountable and respond to data authorisation.
So that just tells me that it wouldn't be caught. If it's a university Wi-Fi on campus, for example, that means nobody is responsible for monitoring all and aggregating and providing later all that traffic.
The service provider still has an obligation in relation to their provision of the communication service to the university.
But what if it's the university? So they are going to be running a mail server, for example, or they're going to be running, you know, a router that provides free Wi-Fi. The only thing that's going to be going back to Telstra or NBN Co in this instance is going to be bulk, just how much traffic was farmed out, not who it went to and how long the sessions were for. Is that, you're nodding, but give hands up.
No, look, I'm nodding because I'm not sure how much I can add without getting into some tricky territory, and I'd be reluctant to speak on behalf of agencies, but it is correct to say that there is no obligation in respect of the hypothetical university, coffee shop, public institution that may be providing its Wi-Fi services to its customers, visitors, etc. There is no obligation placed on those entities to record the individual use of that service by the individual people who come into their premises. Okay. There is, however, it remains the case that there is an obligation on carriers and carriage service providers to retain data in relation to their provision of services to those institutions. So the question is I suppose, a level of aggregation, and while there are certainly some limitations that are associated with that, and I think it was Victoria Police who reflected upon that in hearings on Friday last week, it is nevertheless the case that there is data that is available. The question is the additional steps that a law enforcement agency may need to take to make that data useful and intelligible to them.